the entire practice of marketing is being disrupted. And we're at this really existential crisis. Like a lot of marketers are expressing a lot of fear right now of like, okay, well, generative AI, what am I good for? It's like, well, hang on a minute. Like marketers have a lot of value to add still, but I think there's this kind of this moment where we're realizing that like SEO is basically on life support and like what do we do? So I think for me it's this combination of like using your instincts, using kind of your ability to test hypotheses and combining that with, well, how do I build like durable systems behind these hunches and these experiments that I want to do? Like when I see that something is getting traction, how do I make that automated or make it, operationalize it in a way that it makes it easier to repeat?
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm speaking with Ann James, a seasoned fractional CMO who's been instrumental in helping tech startups secure funding, scale, and achieve successful exits. So, Ann, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
Take us back. So, you've had a diverse career in marketing. You founded a magazine.
Yeah.
You've supported tech startups. How did you why marketing? Why is it personal?
It's a weird one. I kind of fell into marketing. But when I look back, it really makes sense now. So when I initially started, like out of college, I was super into art. I was super into creative writing, and I wanted to go into publishing, but that's not what I studied. I studied anthropology. So I hit a lot of barriers trying to get my first jobs in the publishing industry. And eventually I was just like, well, screw this. Like, doors in my face. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to do my own thing. I'm going to start my own magazine. Um, so that's what I did. I had no idea what I was doing. And I was like doing Kickstarters for the money to print these things and just, inviting people to submit. And it turns out like there's a huge market for what I was really into, which was like surrealist art and kind of magical realism writing and stuff. So we had a ton of submissions. We started getting people subscribing, and over the course of like a few years, it really was very fast. We were suddenly distributed internationally all over like Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, stores across the world. And then eventually I was able to sell this business off, and then kind of decide what I was going to do next. But like over the course of just trying to learn how to like get distribution and print it and everything, I kind of learned all the marketing skills. So then I was like, okay, well, I want to travel. So I ended up in Dublin, Ireland, and I was like, well, what are my skills? What can I do? Like I can do marketing now.
Yeah.
And it turned out it was a great place to do that because Dublin is kind of like a mini Silicon Valley. Like they have all of their headquarters there, so it's really easy to kind of slide into tech roles. So I just kind of started getting opportunities doing that, first with contracts and then kind of more with startups and more kind of working with founders, and it's just kind of rolled on from there.
So
Yeah.
before getting into the tech side, so you just casually dropped that you went from zero to going international and
Yeah.
then selling this thing. There was a lot baked into that process that I assume
Yeah.
you're being way too modest, but like unpack that for me. So um, when you go from zero to one, it's been my experience that one thing is the product, and I'm sure the product that the magazine itself was incredible, and you were able to editorialize and create it. But like, how do
Yeah.
you get the word out in a meaningful way for people to know that your product exists?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it honestly was cold calling, trying to find people who would advertise in the magazine. A lot of it was going to events in the publishing industry and just being obnoxious and walking up to people and being like, "Hey, I have a magazine."
Mhm.
And I would bring, I bought like table space at a few book fairs. Like I was at the Brooklyn Book Festival one year. I would just kind of bring the magazines and try to get people to come over to my booth and talk to me. And then I met some other contacts in the industry who had distribution through some of these big international distributors, and they put me in touch with the folks on those teams. Like Ingram is one of these big distributors, so I kind of got a representative there. But it was really just like being persistent and continuously going out and kind of selling myself and selling this brand.
What
Yeah.
I mean, especially now in light where everything seems to be like uh, optimizing towards AI and whatnot, it was refreshing to hear that I think you just started off by just calling people and talking to people.
Yeah.
Um, how do you what's the balance there between just good old pick up the phone, call someone, and how do you weigh that compared to just like the emerging techniques?
Yeah.
How do you think about it today?
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky back then because I didn't have the choice, or I wouldn't be
Fair.
here. I wouldn't have those skills. But I think nowadays it's really interesting because like the entire practice of marketing is being disrupted. Um, and we're at this really existential crisis. Like a lot of marketers are expressing a lot of fear right now of like, okay, well, generative AI, what am I good for? And it's like, well, hang on a minute. Like marketers have a lot of value to add still. But I think there's this kind of this moment where we're realizing that like SEO is basically on life support, and like what do we do? So I think for me, it's this combination of like using your instincts, using kind of your ability to test hypotheses, and combining that with, well, how do I build like durable systems behind these hunches and these experiments that I want to do? Like when I see that something is getting traction, how do I make that automate it or make it, operationalize it in a way that it makes it easier to repeat. Because I think I'm often in a situation where I'm the first marketer and I have to kind of establish what is best practice here, or I'm the only marketer for a long time. And I have to kind of make it seem like there's a huge team behind me when it's in reality, it's just me using a bunch of different tools.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, I think it's probably some of the more mid-career seasoned marketers are really well positioned to kind of survive this transition and do really well because they started with the pre-AI kind of period where they built up these fundamentals of like having the emotional intelligence and all of those analytical skills first.
hmm hmm
So yeah.
Did did any of the initial lessons learned from your first venture with founding the magazine to transitioning into tech startups, were they the same or were they completely different? I mean, what were some of the lessons learned now from
Yeah.
tech marketing?
Yeah. I mean, the skill set was the same, but it was a completely different situation in that with the magazine, like the buck ends with me. And like I had a team that I had built around me. I had interns, I had, sales representatives and stuff, but I was making all the decisions. Whereas in a startup, I'm usually coming in where there's a pre-established kind of founding team, and I have to kind of find my way into that and manage those relationships and figure out like, how do I become persuasive within this group of people. So I think that that was the biggest kind of transition for me, and kind of understanding the startup mentality. And it's a really interesting space where I think there's a lot at stake. People are invested both emotionally, monetarily. They're spending crazy hours working on building, their dream companies. And for me, like I tend to use a lot of my background as an anthropologist. I'm so grateful for studying what I did in the end, because now I'm kind of studying the market, and I'm studying like our personas and how to speak to them. And but then I'm applying it in a tech startup setting. But it's all kind of relevant in the end.
hmm
It's crazy.
I mean, tell me a little bit more. I mean, so
Yeah.
what some of that kind of practical approach to understanding folks. What does that mean?
Yeah. I mean, so I think that, first of all, it's just kind of understanding like the personas that we're speaking to. And, do we have product market fit? Do we really understand those pain points? And that's kind of a long process to go through, where, you start with your hypotheses, and oftentimes like a founder comes from the background of one of the personas, like in your case, coming from architecture. So we have like some strong hypotheses to build on. But then it's this kind of, you have to test their messaging different ways. So um, oftentimes I'll start out like with some really low risk campaigns, like let's do a couple of thousand and try this message and see what kind of response we get. Um, and then you start to build from there. And hopefully, you are building a really good relationship with your counterpart in sales so that you're getting some kind of feedback from the calls that they're having with prospects. So you have to kind of build the signal out of the noise, out of all of these different sources, and then be able to make decisions about the business's tone of voice and the messaging and kind of continue to iterate on that. Um, so that's kind of the tricky piece of all of this, I think,
Yeah.
is just being able to kind of pick out what is valuable feedback and what is something that I need to cast aside and like abandon that tactic.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm incredibly grateful for is I got a chance to work with you, and in the context of the built environment and real estate, one of the things I know is that the architecture, engineering, construction industry as a whole is fairly, what's the word? Maybe slow to adapt. I think some of the latest marketing, I think it's
Mm,
historically been like a, hey, here is what we've done, here's our portfolio, and you kind of take it or leave it and decide to
yeah.
hire these
Yeah.
services. Um, Whereas I think in tech, I think to that sector's credit, it's been a little bit more about the customer. It's like, hey, you have a problem. Here's the problem. Here's a solution. Um,
Mhm.
I'm curious, like, what's your takeaway when selling into real estate, when selling into AEC? Um, is there a unique way? Is it actually the same way to approach them? Just how do you
Yeah.
unpack that?
Yeah. It's interesting because I feel like in tech, I've worked at a lot of companies where um, the target people that we're selling to are like very no nonsense folks. Like the marketing stuff doesn't really work on them. They're like, this is trash. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want to hear from your sales team. So if you're not offering something of value, then you're not going to get anywhere with these people. And I think that AEC is exactly the same. So they really they're kind of overwhelmed by complexity already. And the last thing they want is another subscription. They don't want any jargon. They don't want, to hear about like your kind of marketing language. So the best thing that you can do is to kind of give them real stories, real anecdotes, real metrics. So I think that customer case studies and kind of building client referrals has been one of the most valuable things that we've been able to do. Um, and also kind of building this podcast around, creating a community of folks that are kind of tech enthusiasts in the AEC space and giving people, a safe space kind of to talk about some of the challenges they're facing.
Right.
Um, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Does the B2B and direct to consumer, is it the same? Is it different? How should we approach it? I appreciate in our case, we
Yes.
were talking to businesses. Um, how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think most of my roles have been in B2B, but I have had a few where it was direct to consumer, and it is really, really different.
Mm,
I think that when you're dealing in the B2C world, there is more of a tolerance for kind of the hype, and if it doesn't look slick, there's almost like a, well, is this real? Is this a good product kind of thing?
mhm.
So you have to look like you have this massive kind of marketing engine behind you. Otherwise, people think like, this is snake oil or something.
Right.
So yeah, there's that aspect of it, but also B2C, you're speaking to so many different kinds of people where like, or B2B rather. Um, B2C is, like we choose a few core personas that we're trying to speak to. We deeply, deeply understand them. Whereas B2C, you have to kind of spray and pray to some degree. And you have to create segments in some way, whether it's some demographic thing that people share or an interest or whatever. So you have to be much more broad with your language, and it's more of a volume game. And I remember like dealing with databases of 80,000 people and having to make a decision of in our email, like what groups are we going to split these people into? Like what do they actually have in common? I have a huge amount of respect for marketers in the B2C space because their challenge is so much harder.
Mm.
Um, than what we have to deal with in the tech space where we really, really know who we're talking to.
Mm,
Mm.
that's a good point. That's a good point. Talk to me. You talked about the earlier about the this evolution, this kind of existential evolution of the marketer. Um, what is a marketer using today, like quite literally in terms of tools
Mm.
today versus what they were using even for say 5 years ago? Like, what are some of the must-haves just to talk shop?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think I remember 5 years ago, like getting a ticket to HubSpot's inbound conference was like the thing. You know, you desperately wanted to be there. You didn't know why, but you felt like you had to be there.
Yeah.
And same thing with Google, like you wanted to hear from them directly.
Mm,
And now it's really interesting because there's so many of these smaller AI tools that like they're coming out of the woodwork every day, and you're like, it's more about like how do I hack these established systems, or how do I use like the dupe of HubSpot or something like that to get me further as a startup because I don't necessarily want to shell out for one of these like massive enterprise things.
mm,
So like what I'm using nowadays, I think I'm doing a lot of collaboration with teams remotely. So you know it's like Figma, Miro boards. We have these like super specialized Slack channels that we're using for particular topics. You know, in terms of automation, oh man, there's so many different platforms out there. Like I right now I'm exploring one called Genesee that's specifically for sales, where you can kind of build out cohorts and find people that match job titles um, and you know even website building is different. It used to be WordPress, now we're on Framer. You know, I'm using a bunch of different like AI tools like Midjourney to create ads. It's wild. You know, it's like
yeah.
every something new every week.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so to apply those tools, I think one of the things that was really instrumental for me was when you helped me kind of understand kind of the top, middle, and bottom of funnel
Yeah.
approaches, right? And understanding the differences between creating awareness, right, versus having folks that understand the problem, the solution, etc. Um, in real estate, what do you find is the biggest challenge in simply creating awareness for a new startup? Like, how, or rather, for a startup in the AEC space, how do you? What advice would you give them as a way to
Yeah.
understand the differences between awareness, problem, solution, etc.?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the kind of the awareness stage is it's kind of funny because it's both for us as a business and for your client, really. I think of it as like we have to be aware of the problem. We have to know what it is. And that's the first step toward kind of product market fit. You know, and then kind of middle of funnel is where, okay, well, I know what my problem is. I know that maybe there's a solution out there for this that exists. So I'm starting to hunt for it. And then your bottom of funnel content is really the point where you have to make the case of like, we are the solution out of everything that you've seen that's going to work for this. So I think in the AEC space, um, the challenge, first of all, is just kind of that resistance to tech adoption in general, where it's sort of like, well, we've been doing this forever. Why should we change? So I think that some of the most effective things that we've done, like particularly at IPX, is just um, putting out content like the podcast, like you know the emails that we do, like webinars, where we just kind of we say, okay, well, here are some problems that we're facing. Like in particular, you know, getting accurate as built should not be as hard as it is still. You know, and there was the webinar that we did recently where we gave out like RFP templates, you know, the bid evaluation matrices. Um, that's like hugely valuable because you're giving people something that they can take away and use right now. You know, and if you're not doing that, then there's no real motivation for people to be curious and come back to you. So I think that you know in AEC, it's less about what you are kind of blasting out at people and more about like leaving you know things that they can use, things that they can kind of take and you know hopefully that builds some goodwill. And if they remember that IPX was the company that helped them solve a really difficult problem, you know I think that'll come back to us in the end.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm just curious if maybe to kind of define a scenario here. Say I am a principal architect of a design firm that's been around for 20, 25 years.
Wow.
Much of my new projects have come through fairly traditional like business development. We've done a ton of, say, commercial and, say, I don't know, commercial and retail spaces and great design. Um, but yeah, outside of a few kind of business development leaders, we have a website.
Mm,
In true architect form, we don't like to promote ourselves too much because it might seem needy. Um, what am I getting wrong? Like, how should I kind of reframe that if I'm wanting to kind of position my design firm
yeah.
for this next generation?
I think I'd be looking at, who are the kind of junior folks that you're bringing on and what are their ideas about the space? Like these are, the folks that you're bringing on who are fresh out of college, who are, bright-eyed and they're hungry and they're looking for inspiration. Like where are they going for that inspiration? Like let's figure out what the watering holes are. Because chances are that's a good place to kind of build like a bottom-up groundswell of interest in your firm and differentiate. So, that might be on Instagram, that might be on TikTok, that might be on, platforms that you're not super comfortable with, um, but somebody in your firm is. So I think it's about kind of figuring out like what are the new resources that kind of lend you some of that brand value, and kind of create the sort of advertising that's more of an organic nature.
How would I get past as a principal of a firm? Even the thought of TikTok like might
Yeah,
seem silly at first because I maybe equate it to folks dancing and like
yeah, yeah,
I don't dare to kind of put out my work on like such reputable work
yeah.
out there. But what am I what am I missing? Like what am I not understanding here?
Yeah, there's a lot more going on there. There's a lot of communities within communities on there. And I think that there are people having really, really interesting, deep conversations with whether it's with their followers or it's people responding to each other about like what good design is, about does design have certain responsibilities now in terms of sustainability, like so there's kind of deep questions that the same things that you are asking of your peers when you go to trade shows or when you come to an event with other principals, with other folks in design technology, the same questions are happening on these newer platforms. So you're missing out on kind of the next generation of folks who are coming up. And then eventually you'll only be speaking to folks who are really senior who are on the way out the door. So it's really when you're investing in these platforms, you're investing in kind of the longevity of your firm.
So let's say you've convinced me. I am open. I want to entertain these new channels. One of the biggest concerns is kind of losing our tone of voice and our
Mm.
brand. What does it mean? Like how does a company find their voice? How do we like what are the questions we should be asking ourselves? Why does it matter? What's been your experience in helping organizations kind of drill down on their voice?
Yeah, I mean, usually it starts with the founder, honestly. And it starts with kind of the internal conversations where it's like you're exhausted, you've spent all day in front of a whiteboard, everybody's kind of like in a keyed up state and they're starting to argue with each other. Like your tone of voice is there, really. It's when you're starting to kind of have these healthy discussions and you're challenging each other. That is exactly like the most authentic tone of voice that you can have when you're talking to other folks in the industry. So I think it's um, if you have a unique point of view, if you're willing to kind of put your head above the parapet a little bit and say something that other people are like, hey, whoa, that gets you attention right now. So I think we're seeing a lot of proliferation of content out there that is kind of samey and isn't daring at all. It's very safe. And so I think that like, if you want to really stand out, you have to kind of figure out like, what do we want people to feel? Um, and how kind of daring can we be while still kind of working within the confines of like what we feel is respectful for our audience. So I mean, those are the kind of things that you have to work out internally. But It's sort of a process, I think.
Yeah. Drill down on that. So you mentioned, a lot of the content that's being out there is samey. Like what do you mean?
Oh, um, there's a lot of like repetitive phrases that I see, and there's a lot of like GPT kind of sounding language, where it's like, this is happening, but, there's those kind of sentence structures, where it's very predictable. And you're just like, okay, you know,
Mhm. Well, cringe.
nobody wrote this.
Yeah.
But it's kind of weird because it's creeping into the way that we copyright as well. So I'm seeing people writing like GPT now, and it's influencing our vocabulary and our language. So I think that like that's one of the things for me where yes, this is this incredible tool that can enable us to do so much more volume as marketers. Um, and we absolutely should be investigating these tools, and we have a responsibility to use everything to our advantage. But at the same time, it's like, well, what do we want to, where do we want humans to still be in the loop, and where do we want that authenticity to come through? And I think that there needs to be that moderation in terms of your content, especially in the early days. If you don't invest in kind of doing the hard work of figuring out your voice and putting out like, a decent library of stuff that you've really kind of slaved over, then you won't really have that proprietary data set of stuff that then you can go and bring it to a tool like GPT and be like, okay, tell me more like in this voice.
Hmm.
So you have to start with the hard work of like building that data set.
Hmm. Yeah, what is the relationship of so if I'm a marketing leader, um what's the appropriate place for AI? Like how do I use it and when and where? To your point, it
Yeah,
seems like folks are just copy pasting whatever AI is telling them, and it
yeah,
is creating a lot of noise out there.
yeah.
How what's the right ratio? Like how do you navigate that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I do use it for content, but I use it more of a like generate a first draft, and then I'm going to come in and I'm going to edit you. So I've gone back to like my magazine days a little
Hmm.
bit with it.
Hmm.
So I kind of provide the oversight, but also I think it's really useful for because we have all these new tools coming out all the time. I've asked it for things like how do I um, do some kind of advanced automation in Airtable or something. So I've taught myself how to use tools with this, kind of, can you walk me through step by step how to do something? And I think that that is one of the most valuable things you can do. And also just sort of using it as a thought partner of, perplexity can be very useful for deep dives if you're like, I want to get a kind of high level picture of what is happening in this market right now. Um, so there's a few different ways that you can kind of leverage it.
Yeah. I'm just thinking out loud here, but I do hear in, different circles around tech and is that, what used to take, a team of say 5, 10 is now, in terms of just stitching together solutions and creative and copy and whatnot is now being put together with a team of one or two.
Mm,
Has that been your experience? I mean, I don't know how to feel about that because on the one hand, I mean, it's great for the individual, but on the other hand, um, yeah, I guess further isolates us, less from teams and more into individuals. I mean, how have you seen something similar, or is that
mm.
just in certain pockets?
No, I think that's happening everywhere. And it's interesting because it's not necessarily taking jobs away from anyone. I'm not really worried about that. It's just that what we're doing is really different. So, like, in some ways, I think we're more connected because I'm able to produce this content really quickly. I can share it with, like, a product team, or I can share it with somebody in sales and get their feedback and be like, hey, does this resonate with you? Is this correct? Um, so if anything, it's sort of bringing us together, and it's enabling folks who otherwise might be a little too shy to produce content, or they don't think that's their place in an organization. It's like enabling me to be like, actually, why don't we platform you as a thought leader? I'm going to help you do that, and we can do that really easily because you can just talk at me, and we'll go through this process, and we'll use like a little bit of AI to help us out. So I'm finding it in a lot of ways really beneficial.
Yeah.
It's like the opposite of isolating.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, I mean, you just touched on, mm, like thought leaders. I know for me, um, it was particularly difficult for me to kind of get over myself just being a little shy or being kind of too scared to post. But I did get to a point where with the company, I was like, okay, well, now this is a little bit bigger than just me and my feelings. Like, I need to make sure that the company's out there and speaking, and I
Mm.
need to make sure that we're, talking about the industry, how we view it. I'm finding that more founders are stepping in to be kind of that um, voice. I guess maybe as opposed to what I perhaps what we got used to, say 10, 20 years ago when it was like the brand speaking.
Yeah.
Um, is that a uniquely startup thing, or are you finding that, more of the leaders and the companies do have to step out, get, just kind of get over themselves and just get used to being more vocal?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's much more um, accepted and kind of expected in the startup community, but it's starting to creep into every vertical, I think. Um, Oftentimes because there isn't that kind of brand anonymity anymore. Like folks are online, they're interested in who's leading these companies. They're, in some cases challenging them directly on social media. So you kind of have no choice but to engage. But I think in startups, I really like the idea of the founder being a personality and having this voice rather than the brand, because I think, what we've seen with IPX, folks are more interested in following people than they are interested in following the company. And why would you resist that? I think it's great. Because it's sort of an extension of something that I think startups really desperately need, which is they need their founder to make space on a regular basis to kind of data dump at their teams of like, here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm my vision, here's what I'm passionate about, here's where the industry is going. If you don't do that, I've been in a lot of larger, more established enterprise companies where the CEO is like this kind of quasi mythical figure who's like very distant, and you feel kind of nervous, like you shouldn't even reach out and ask them for anything. And inevitably in those organizations, everybody's rowing in different directions. So it's a total disaster. So like um, you really need the CEO to kind of feel comfortable just kind of data dumping on folks. So I think that um, like with our weekly all hands at IPX, every now and then, like you'll take a few minutes where you're just like, okay, here's what's on my mind lately. And that has helped me feel confident to make decisions on my own about what is a priority for the marketing function. And it's allowing me to kind of hear what you're saying, make that value judgment without you having to kind of step in and be like, okay, well, here's your priorities for this week or this quarter or whatever.
Hmm.
So it's really hugely empowering. And then you just kind of recycle what's happening internally for for the kind of general public and bring people into your story.
Right.
Because that type of authentic content and that kind of storytelling where you're showing like the whole process and the failures on the journey and everything, that is what people are really excited to hear about now.
That and that being vocal, I guess to your point, helping drive alignment or just trying to
Yeah,
kind of
yeah.
driving a priority or focus. Yeah. Yep, yep, yep. So maybe to hear from you, I mean, you're on the front lines of what I consider to be like the next wave of what it means to be a marketer. If you had to, tell Anne 10 years younger, like, hey, here's what you need to know in 2025 to
Mhm.
be stand out. Like, what are the things that stand out to you? It's like if whether it's young Anne or someone just coming out of college today, what should they be reading, listening to? What should they be talking
Oh,
about?
interesting. I mean, honestly, I spend a lot of my free time scrolling on LinkedIn. I have a few marketing leaders and startup founders and particularly folks in like generative AI right now that I'm following them, and I'm just kind of lurking in those threads,
Hmm.
and that has been hugely beneficial to me, because I think it's that like short format of just like, okay, here's a topic, and then I'll go off and research that more deeply somewhere else. But it's giving me kind of a sense of what what are the hot topics that I need to be aware of. But I think, one of the fundamental things that I would say to myself or to somebody younger is probably it's more exciting right now to go into marketing than I think it's ever been, which is probably really contradictory to what most people will be saying right now. But I think it's very exciting because you have this opportunity where more and more startups are having marketers kind of at the table in terms of leadership decisions.
Hmm.
Whereas before it was like this, okay, it's the coloring department, so we've really come a long way in terms of the respect for this function. But also with technologies like generative AI that are coming out, um, it enables you to kind of learn more quickly, to do more with less, um, to build yourself up as a voice in the industry if you want to. Um, and it's more democratic in a way. Like if I 10 years ago as a young marketer wanted to like build up a profile of myself as some kind of influencer, people would be like, no, what the hell?
Hmm.
So nowadays, I think you can kind of develop a lot more like deep understanding very quickly and be able to position yourself in that way where you do have something really valuable to say and add to the conversation.
Hmm. 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 For those listening in, if it wasn't already obvious, Anne was actually one of the most instrumental individuals bringing this podcast to life. And so, if you have enjoyed previous episodes, we have Anne to thank for that. And so, Anne, I want to begin to kind of close out this conversation by saying, well, number one, thank you. I think the ability to bring folks and highlight their voices, their stories in the AEC industry, talk about the challenges, the opportunities, has been something that I think personally for me has been foundational in how I think about the industry, how I think about the company, how I can support the team. So I just wanted to say thank you, I guess. And with that, I mean, what's most exciting to you? So on these kind of this new chapter you're going into, like what are you most excited about?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, thank you because like you took a big swing on like, will this podcast work? We had no idea.
Yeah.
And now it's building this huge momentum and there's a community behind it. Um, And I think that it's really interesting because, at some point, I believe there will be a Buildings 2.0 live in New York, with a live audience. And I think that we're going to see the culmination of this community because I know that folks are reaching out to you individually of like, oh, wow, this podcast episode was great, or hey, I've been following for a while. So I know that that community is out there. I think we're going to start to see that come out into like the physical realm very soon, which is super cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think yeah, one of the most exciting things for me looking forward is creating more like this. It's going back to the things that I was super excited about as a kid in college. Like, how do we create a media brand? Let's create a community around a podcast or around a newsletter or something like that. So, um, it's more about these communities where folks are having these ongoing conversations with each other than me just as a marketer like advertising into the void, which is a much more exciting space to be in. So I'm very excited about these kind of micro communities, these really niche communities that we're starting to build that I'm seeing crop up about all kinds of topics everywhere.
And this has been super fun. For those that do want to follow your journey, want to work with you, want to reach out to you just for advice, where should they find you?
Yeah, I mean, the best place to find me is LinkedIn. So
Okay.
I'm on there as in/James Ann. It's backwards.
Okay. Okay.
And I've been working with a really cool company called AI Finder. So they are solving a lot of the problems that I've been talking about in terms of visibility in search engine results, in terms of, well, how do I create like a custom GPT for my company? So I'm doing some really interesting work with them, and I think that they might be building their own community very soon too. So
That's
it's
so
super
exciting.
exciting. Yeah.
That's so exciting. And thanks for joining.
Thank you.